The South Carolina Gamecocks continue to stack talent in the trenches, especially now on the defensive side of the ball, as they have landed four-star edge defender Desmond Umeozulu.
Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to a quick reaction show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Your show, as always, for daily headlines and potential storylines on your favorite South Carolina Gamecock sports teams. I'm your host, Andrew Lyon, and thank you once again for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts daily, and it's always great to be able to do a show like this because it means great news on the recruiting front for Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks. And that continues today as they have landed four-star edge defender Desmond Umeozulu out of Flowers High School up in Maryland. So how did the Gamecocks get here with Desmond Umeozulu? Well, South Carolina and defensive end / outside linebacker coach Sterling Lucas never took their foot off the gas here with this recruitment. Even when for most months out of this calendar year, it seemed like they were behind both North Carolina and eventually Ohio State. But there were a couple things that happened in this recruitment that changed South Carolina's standing, besides the fact, obviously, that, again, they stayed consistently in contact with Desmond Umeozulu. North Carolina landed two four-star edge defenders in Jabron Harvey, who was also a Gamecock target, and Rico Walker. And from my perspective, they seem to back off a little bit here. At least that's what I would guess. But Ohio State also got some talented prospects as well. But at the same time, they seem to really mess things up behind the scenes here. I mentioned on today's show that Ohio State seemed to have a really big barbecue weekend for recruits who were visiting go completely awry, which could have maybe played a part in Umeozulu losing some interest, but also seemed to have some other things happen behind the scenes, which caused Umeozulu to question their genuineness and honesty with him in the recruiting process. And he posted a cryptic tweet earlier in August, which I also covered on today's show, regarding that seemingly. And again, South Carolina stayed constant with him. They never let off in this recruitment. Sterling Lucas had really built up a close and personal relationship with Desmond Umeozulu, and that, combined with some of the other factors that I just mentioned, really seemed to help the Gamecocks land this highly talented blue chip prospect at the end of the day. So where does Umeozulu rank amongst the rest of his peers in high school football? Well, for those of you watching this on YouTube right now, here is where he is rated. He's rated as the 167th best prospect in the country and the 4th best prospect out of Maryland, according to 24/7 Sports Composite. He was also offered by the likes of Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, and many, many others as well. So at this point, you may be wondering, what are the Gamecocks getting in Desmond Umeozulu? Could he be one of the next great defensive linemen to come through South Carolina heading on to the NFL eventually? Well, I got a real strong opinion on how I think he will pan out at South Carolina that I'll be going over in just a few moments. But first, I do need to pass along a message from our friends over at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, who are the sponsors for today's quick reaction show. Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? What's the worst that can happen anyways? You end up driving below the speed limit? It's no big deal, right? Well, you would be wrong about that. The truth is your reaction time slowed down considerably when you're high. You're not only putting yourself in danger, but everyone around you as well. Talk about a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high, and you'll get a DUI. Welcome back to the second half of today's quick commitment reaction show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. And thank y'all once again for making us your first listen, where we cover Gamecock sports every single day. All right, so let's go over some of the film notes that I took from Desmond Umeozulu's junior season at Flowers High School, which is in the Prince George County region for high school football in Springdale, Maryland. Now, a quick summary before I go over some of my specific notes. Desmond Umeozulu has all the tools, in my opinion, to be a first-team All-SEC pass rusher at South Carolina. And here's why. He has a really quick burst off the line of scrimmage. Probably one of the fastest get-offs that I've seen out of all of South Carolina's defensive line targets up to this point, who I've watched film on. He also does a great job of keeping his arms extended when engaging a blocker. As a defensive lineman, if you basically have T-Rex arms and you've got a hold of the offensive lineman, but your arms are tucked in like this, you're not exerting any upper body power against your opponent there. And more often than not, if a defensive lineman gets caught up in this kind of situation, then you're not going to end up winning that one-on-one battle. Desmond Umeozulu does a great job of keeping his arms extended at all times, which allows him freedom to do a couple of other things that I'm going to touch on in just a moment. He also has a really sweet overhand club and underhand rip move in pass rush. He's got a couple of moves that he's going to be able to carry and translate to the college game. He takes great angles in pass rush as well. Out of all the baseline responsibilities that defensive linemen have in a football game, one that gets forgotten a lot by most fans is the fact that even if you do not end up getting a sack, if you don't get a tackle for loss, okay, that's fine. How do you do in your pass rush angle? Do you hold a constant angle going towards the quarterback, maintaining your pass rush lane and not leaving your gap? Or do you kind of go all over the place? Maybe you're going a whole man instead of shading over half a man, and therefore you're going to get the quarterback an opportunity to potentially escape the pocket on your side of the field. That's something that is a really high priority for defensive linemen. But again, sometimes that's not something that you see constantly. Desmond Umeozulu does not have that issue. He does a great job of maintaining his gap and maintaining his pass rush lane, which allows him the opportunity to get as many sacks as he has so far in his high school career. Again, that translates to a great degree in the college game. He also is good at recognizing when a pass is coming to his side of the ball based on his eyes reading the quarterback, and he does a great job of getting his hands up to bat that pass down more often than not. And lastly, he does a good job at times cross-facing an offensive lineman, basically working from one side of the offensive lineman to the other side and getting off of his block to an inside gap in order to be able to help bring down a ball carrier in rush defense. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube, remember I mentioned earlier about how he does a great job of keeping his arms extended. Well, him doing that allows him to do what I just mentioned. Cross-facing an offensive lineman where he can do a quick maybe swipe down, get rid of the offensive lineman's hands, and then cut inside, or even maybe take his outside hand, club over the offensive lineman's arms, and get rid of his hands that way as well. So, an in-depth summary of what I think of Desmond Umeozulu's game. He is a rare high school defensive line prospect who possesses both solid athleticism and great technique to go along with that. If you just watch a couple of minutes of his film on Huddle, you can tell very quickly that he has great coaching that has helped him with all of his technique in high school. And in my opinion, in terms of scheme fit, he's going to fit in perfectly as an edge defender in Clayton White's 4-2-5 defense. I can tell you all right now, he may need a year to add some weight. He is listed at 230 pounds according to 24/7 Sports profile on him right now. But Umeozulu is not going to be riding the bench for very long. Taking into account when he enrolls at South Carolina, Umeozulu, in my opinion, may get some rotational snaps in year one automatically just based on the depth that is there right now, or maybe lack thereof, admittedly. And in my opinion, he'll really take flight in his second year in the program, and in my opinion, could very easily be a starter for the South Carolina defensive front in his second year. I think he's got that much potential. And with everything that I just mentioned, I think that he could be in line to be one of the next great pass rushers here at South Carolina. Now, how does he affect South Carolina's overall 2023 recruiting class? Well, Umeozulu joins four-star defensive line prospects Xavion Hardy, Xavier McLeod, and Montique Rames in what has become one of the best defensive line classes in the country for the 2023 cycle. It might be one of the best defensive line classes the Gamecocks have landed in a very long time. That is, of course, if all these guys end up signing with the Gamecocks, which, as of this very moment, I think looks very likely. The Gamecocks recruiting class does now rank 15th in the country according to 24/7 Sports composite rankings and has passed Arkansas for the 6th best recruiting class in the SEC. The Gamecocks are now fully entrenched in the top half of the conference in the recruiting rankings, and again, they might not be done just yet, including a couple of other defensive line prospects that I've mentioned in the past. They might be adding to this class before all is said and done. But nonetheless, this is a big-time get for Sterling Lucas, Shane Beamer, and the South Carolina recruiting staff, who, again, never gave up in this entire process. You cannot let that be lost in the shuffle. And being consistent with the message they delivered to Desmond Umeozulu seems like it really helped them win out in this recruiting battle with some of these other big-time football programs in college football. But that's going to do it for today's quick commitment reaction show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed this reaction show. What are your thoughts on Desmond Umeozulu? What do you think he brings to the football field? Is there something I didn't mention that you think should have been brought up? How do you think he's going to do at South Carolina if he ends up signing with the Gamecocks? What do you think his impact could be on the football field? I want to hear all of y'all's thoughts, as always, down below in the comments section if you're watching this on YouTube. But of course, if you're listening to today's quick commitment reaction show on an audio podcast app, wherever you get your podcast daily, you can also feel free to shoot me a message at @alion_SC on Twitter, and I'll be sure to respond to any replies or comments that you have for me as quickly as I see them. And also, if you've enjoyed the Locked On Gamecocks podcast and you want to get more news on the entire SEC conference, then make Locked On SEC your second listen every day, where host Chris Gordy and the local experts of Locked On take you across the entire SEC in just 30 minutes. So again, make Locked On SEC your second listen after, of course, the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. But again, y'all, that's going to do it for me on today's quick reaction show. Hope that y'all have a great rest of your Monday, and I'll catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.